Well, I've got someone with me here who I've known for a while, who's a really interesting person. She's called Tita Larasati from Bandung in Indonesia. And when I first met you, I kept on seeing signs in Bandung that said an emerging creative city. And I thought, hey, that's absolutely great. That encapsulates the idea best because, you know, a creative city is a never ending quest. Now, you chair the Creative City Bandung Forum. So tell me a bit about that, how and why you got into it, and what you're trying to achieve, and so on.
Yeah, it started in about 2007, I think, 2008. And it started as a kind of activism because we didn't like how the city went. So we didn't like how the city was arranged, like there's nobody at all to manage it. So we are a group of people, mostly architects, designer, artists, musicians, media people, and so on. So from different background. So we thought, okay, let's not blame anyone. Let's just take over the city how we like it. But then we use whatever we have at hand, which is our creativity, our creative thinking, and so on. So that's how we started. We make a lot of say prototypes for urban solutions. Some are physical, some are activities and programs. But at least we through those prototypes we can show the government and the people how the city can work and they can experience it right away. It can stay for a weekend or for a whole week or for a whole month, but at least we tried something. So that's how we did our
So
organization.
give me an example of something you tried that was a prototype.
Yeah, for example, we try to convince the municipality that one of our square is very empty, it's very dark because they couldn't afford electricity or whatever. But it's really in the middle of the city. So we said, if you put public art in it, then people will go there for positive activities. Of course, they said we have no budget for that. There's no list in the budget for art and so on and so on. So we just built our art with our own money. And of course, the government couldn't tear it down because tearing it down also needs money. So we just keep it there, rain or shine. It got broken, so we build it again. Who cares? But then within maybe a year or so, it's proven that people come there for positive activities. So in the next 2 years, then they arrange a budget for that. So now it's there for forever.
And did you also put lighting in and things like that, or how did that work?
Yeah, there's a scheme that we can actually ask um, private sector to sponsor this kind of things. So those kind of efforts that we did.
And how many in this activist group were there?
Well, the founders of BCCF are about 45 people. So
That's quite something. Okay. All
it was a lot of
right.
fun. Yeah.
And that group did initially, I mean, obviously there's a lot of people in there, but then as you proceeded, did you sort of have a sort of executive group that did more work than others?
No, actually, we move in because we are mostly professionals or hobbyists in our own respect. So some of us are really already having international and national recognitions as whatever they do. So architects, musicians, and so on. But then we used to work separately. So when we did this first gathering, that's when just before you came, then we thought, okay, we are from different background, but at least we have one common goal, which is to make our city cool. Because we are cool, but how come our city is not cool as us? So then we have this kind of notion to just have fun in the city. The city is our lab.
Yeah, yeah, but that's interesting because when I went to Bandung, I remember seeing all sorts of quite interestingly bizarre things. I don't know, in some streets there were sort of, I don't know, Disney figures jumping out of buildings and Supermen and so on. That had happened already, or was that just a private initiative of some shops, or what?
Yeah, that's somehow Bandung has this characteristic of you don't want to be the same as your neighbors, but then you are competing in a nice way, so you're not nasty to them, but instead you have to step over and do more than your neighbors, and those what you saw is a row of shops that want to stay. Of course, they want to stay visible compared
Yeah,
to the
yeah.
rest.
But also, what was interesting, I remember there were lots of underpasses, and I think there was the Hella Festival and things like that, which were quite frightening. And you seem to, I don't know, make this. You could call it an artwork, but it was really about making the place safe. Is that true?
Yeah, that's among one of our projects as well. So there's this new flyover underpass is just like a gray area where nobody use it. So we actually also proposed to the municipality to build a kind of park there, skate park, futsal park, and so on. But then the authorities said that, oh, what if it's not safe? What if the bridge fell down and so on? So we just built our lab, yeah, another urban lab to make temporary exhibitions and so on to express ourselves. So, but now it's really happening.
So basically, you did a lot of these prototypes, and some of them have become incorporated in the way the city operates. Is that true?
That came later. So what we did when we started the organization is just making this kind of prototypes with our own means. Among the later one was the forest, the Canopy Walk, which is situated in this city forest, the only city forest that we had. But then the city and a company used to have the plan to break it down and make an apartment, restaurant, and so on. So we wanted to keep our forest. So that's why we built this Canopy Walk within 9 days, and now it's being already uh, it's bigger now, so it's more permanent.
And this 9 days, I mean, were you allowed to build the canopy walk, or did you just do it?
We didn't ask for any permission. We just asked for forgiveness if we got caught, but of course it's legal. And yeah, of course it didn't run smoothly. We just wanted, it was a form of we made a kind of competition. So we said to, it's a national level. So in the competition we said, okay, what if you have so and so such forest? What would you do as an intervention? So the
Uh-huh.
winners are a group of young architects from other cities than Bandung, and we just realized the ideas, and it's a competition. So it's there.
All right. So you sort of said, "Oh, this is just a competition. This will only be there for a few weeks or months," and then it became sort of fixed. Is that
Permanent.
right?
Yes.
All right. I mean, Bandung, because it's probably the big university city in Indonesia, I presume it has a special spirit that might be different from other places. Is that true?
Yeah, we tend to think so. Yeah, because historically in 1955, there's an important event going on in Bandung, which is the Asia Africa Conference, which inspired the ASEAN African countries to get their independence and so on. But then the size itself and how it became the favorite city of the colonial government then. So they made a lot of also experiment of Art Deco buildings and so on. As you could see, we had a lot of this old building, and Bandung is said to have the most historical buildings, colonial buildings, compared to other cities in Indonesia. So that's why you
Uh-huh.
get a different atmosphere when you're here.
And do you, I mean, have you also helped protect some of these buildings in your work?
Yeah, we try to do that. It's not easy because such buildings have well different interests going on there. But then we also, for example, in the beginning of our organization, we made a kind of award for the worst and the best colonial buildings that is used for commercial purpose. So we have these winners coming. They didn't know if they're the worst or the best. They just came. So we just announced it that you won the worst, you won the best. So
All
such
right.
thing. So we
That's,
we build the issues, yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. You're basically saying speculative real estate people want to build a skyscraper and not have a sort of three-story building.
Yeah, or shops.
Yeah, I mean, one of your co-initiatives and colleagues is Ridwan Kamil, and he became mayor and then governor of West Java, which I believe is the most populous area in Indonesia. That must have helped you a bit along the way. Is that true or false? Or
Yeah, well, it sort of goes both ways. So when we started our organization in 2008, it was officiated what we did is making small changes because we see the city as a like a human body. It's really organic. So if the city has something sick in one of its parts, so we have this needle of creativity that we pin in, and then if we do it consistently but repeatedly, we hope that the spot will heal. So that's urban acupuncture. But then small, but then having this impact, and we've been doing that a lot. And Ridwan Kamil was the first chairman of BCCF, and then he ran for mayor. So that was 2013, and he won because people apparently like what we did, but also because we've been doing this acupuncture for a while. But then we thought that okay, as communities, if we keep doing changing from small things, but then the top-down authorities keeps making damage in bigger scale, then what we do is sometimes uh, it then goes to nothing. So that's why we said, okay, we should push one of us to be there, to be the authorities, so we
Uh-huh.
can do both ways. So Ridwan ran and he won, and then he took some of our programs to the policy level, which is not easy as well, because the governments are used to do just year by year the same thing. So
Uh-huh.
when Ridwan get to office as a mayor, then when he brings our programs to the policy level, he has a different challenge up there. But at least what we wanted to be when we started the organization came through. So when Ridwan was mayor, he made a lot of changes again in the public space, public art, and so on and so on. So yeah, that's a lot of help in both ways, in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah. I mean, because it feels like one of your main strategies is really to create a human-centered city, is the way it feels. Is that correct?
Yeah, because Ridwan, you know him as well. So you know that he keeps saying that his principle is well, when he ran for mayor, his slogan was livable, lovable city. So livable, lovable Bandung, which is easy to understand by
Yeah, yeah,
everybody.
and easy to say, livable,
Yeah,
lovable. I
yeah,
could even say it.
yeah.
But so, in a sense, what we can say is that you had an impact. Here was a group of activists that did things, that experimented. One of your members became the mayor and then even went into a higher office. So,
Mhm.
in short, you had an effect, I
Yeah,
think. We must say that.
yeah.
But you must have come across obstacles along the way. I mean, certain interests saying, like with the heritage building, what's all this creativity nonsense and what's all this art stuff what is it all about? Is that true?
To start with, Bandung is well, if you find art school, the first is in Bandung. So it was 1920. It was built by the colonial government. But then now we have in Bandung more than 120 universities and at least 14 universities with design, architecture, culture, art, craft disciplines. So just imagine if one campus accept 300 art students a year, then times that 14. So we have lots of artists living here. So it's not, again, not too surprising if
Yeah,
suddenly you see something
yeah,
different in a
absolutely.
way.
I mean, what's interesting is obviously that arts industry and the creative economy that is also involved in that really helped probably Bandung move more into the new economy, which is about the digital world and so on. Is that true?
Yeah, well, you asked about the challenge. The challenge was that the regulations, policies, and rules, they're still very stiff. So sometimes they don't have this wording for budgets that goes to support arts, because what they used to do is to support infrastructure, education, sanitation, and so on. But creative economy and now digital economy is actually in all these cross-sectoral sectors. So that's why when Ridwan was mayor, he made a lot of councils, and one of them is the Creative City Committee, which I was the chairman. So we made a lot of roadmap that change this kind of regulations or make it softer, so they can support such movements. So
Uh-huh.
what's made Bandung, because well, policy moves much slower than technology advancement.
Yeah.
So
And
policy,
I
yeah.
understand what you're saying.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
No, that's very interesting. One of the things I suppose one would have to say is, can you only be like that in Bandung, in contrast to Yogyakarta or Jakarta? Do you think could have only happened in Bandung?
Uh, Actually, no, because we have lots of colleagues now in different cities. So in 2015, because Bandung was seen as emerging creative city, we have lots of guests, friends coming from different cities, islands from all over Indonesia. So in 2015, we made a conference called Creative Cities Conference, and we declare 10 principles of creative city of Indonesia. And by then, there was only like 20 cities. And now, 2020, we gathered 210 cities all over Indonesia that all committed to, so we put it in this white paper. It's called Creative City. So this is the English version, but this is the Indonesian version. So as you can see, the Indonesian version is way thicker because because in this book we try to match our 10 principles to Indonesian government's KPI, because otherwise they wouldn't put any interest in it. So we also lure the local government to say to believe that if you implement the 10 principles with us communities, then you will reach your KPI at the maximum. So we help them. That's why the Indonesian version is thicker, because we are adapting our principles into tables that they can understand, that even contains the grading of their KPI. So that's another move actually to get into the policy tricks.
I must say that you're so clever. Your group is really incredibly clever, and it's very impressive. I mean, of course, you've had various awards, and people wanted you to become a creative city, UNESCO, and all of that. And I remember they wanted you to be design, and you said, we don't want to just be design. We want to be everything. So perhaps that's my final question. Have you got anything to say about that, Tita?
The requirements from UNESCO and the requirements, we have also other indicators and so on. So we work with that. And it seems that from the 7 category of the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, finally design fits more, because although we are also music, films and gastronomy and so on, but all the requirements actually fits for our design potentials, because design constitutes from architecture, landscape architect, product design, even to the new craft and illustrations and so on. So those are what we have most in measurable sense.
Yeah, I love the way that you're so measurable. You've got, evidence bases and so on. I mean, basically, you look at things holistically, and that's what I love about the way Bandung functions.
Thank you.
Well, that's what I've got to say to you, because that's true. Well, look, Tita, it's been really great to speak to you, and it's all pretty impressive. And I hope to see you soon in person rather than just here in this virtual way.
It's been a while. Love to do that too, yeah. Hopefully.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Anyway, I've got someone here who I think is really great, called Jo Kukathas. And as you don't know, audience, but I know, she's done many interesting things. She's been a theatre producer and an actress. But particularly what I love about her work is how she's used satire and that sort of twist to come into characters. One of them, she's a minister who's corrupt, and another, she's a civil servant in the lost and found department. And all of that is so much part of what we're trying to do in the Creative Bureaucracy Festival, is really, how do you encourage change and so on? And also, she's Julius Caesar occasionally and things like that. But anyway, my question to you is, tell me how people in Malaysia and perhaps elsewhere in the region have responded to your work.
Well, I think when we first started Instant Cafe, which is where these characters were born, my company's Instant Cafe, 30 years ago, a lot of people said, you can't do this kind of comedy in Malaysia. You definitely can't do satire. The authorities will shut you down. But, I think we just decided to ignore them. And 30 years later, we're still around, still doing satire, still doing comedy. And the deputy minister character was one of the earliest characters who I came up with, because how do you satirize politics? By except by being a politician. So you satirize from the inside out. You become that thing which is so loathsome. And I had great fun kind of like developing him over the years. I didn't know who he really was to start with. He started off as being in the Ministry of Misinformation, and he was vying for that post with another deputy minister. And so the first sketch we ever wrote ended with me stabbing him in the back. And then he sort of kind of went a bit solo and a bit rogue, and then started doing shows where he's being interviewed by a host about all kinds of things. And he's been in many ministries over the years. He's been in the Ministry of Moral Panic. He's been in the Ministry of Rubbish and Reconciliation. He's been in the Ministry of Space and Tourism. So he's been a very interesting character for me to play over the years. And as the years have gone by, I mean, people have come to love him. Oddly enough, and I've become very fond of him because he can say whatever he likes, and he can hoist himself with his own petard, and he can say terrible things about the present government, and he can get away with saying a lot of things because he's funny, and because he's so outrageous.
And the lost and found lady, what about her?
Yeah, actually, she first came about as a character. I was writing a sketch with a friend of mine about censorship. We were writing it for another actor, and he looked at the script and he said, it's not funny. So I said, okay, I'll play that character. I mean, the character's written for a man, but I said, okay, I'll do it. And, you know, we had to do the show I think that evening. So I just stuck the script on a clipboard, and I bought a roll of film. This is how long ago it was. And I spent the entire sketch just sort of cutting up this roll of film because all the things I was censoring inside it. So at first she was the first civil service job she had was somebody who was in charge of film censorship. She was a bureaucrat in charge of film censorship. But over the years, she's been in many departments. She's also been in the Ministry of stopping people from making films which are outrageous in Malaysia. She's been in the Ministry of in the Department of Ambulances to develop a new Malaysian ambulance. She's been in an industry to develop a sex drug. I mean, sort of like a Malaysian version of Viagra. And now she's the Ministry of Lost and Found. Where she loses things. Her job is to lose things. If you want something to go missing, her job is to lose it for you. So a lot of ministers come to her for help. So what happened to the 2.6 billion ringgit? She helped it go missing.
Right. Okay, that's excellent. Has your work actually changed attitudes in the public administration and how it works?
I think it has in some way, in that people know that we are around. I remember many years ago, I went to do a show in Penang, and you know, used to do a lot of shows for corporations. The government would invite us to do shows, in fact, for some of their events. And in the show in Penang, one of the maintenance men came up to me when we were doing our sound check, and he said, oh, I really love Instant Cafe. I'm going to watch you tonight. So I said, oh, that's great. I said, when did you see us before? He said, oh, I've never seen you, but I've heard about you. I've heard that you do this thing where you make fun of the government. And that's all that it took. So I always feel it isn't about how many people see you, but people know what you're doing. And they think, well, then we can also say things. We can say the emperor has no clothes. And I think it has, I mean, from what I've heard anecdotally, it has helped people individually. It has made the government very aware that there are comedians out there poking fun at them. And I'd like to think that maybe it inspired other comedians now, who are young comedians now, to start thinking, yeah, we can do political satire, because at the time when we started, there wasn't really people doing that.
Is political satire perhaps one of the main ways? I was thinking in our former conversation, we talked about the Soviet Union and things like that.
Yeah.
This is the way you could actually get a message across through this metaphorical approach.
Absolutely, because if you then say you're talking about us, then you are admitting to some, something evil, corrupt, clandestine, something you want to hide, and then you're saying, oh, that's us. We're like, no, that's not about you. That's about this other thing. So in that way, it's useful. It's not to say we haven't gotten into trouble, because with the authorities we have, because of course they do know what you're saying, but it's hard to put your finger on it without naming yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose different cultural contexts differ, obviously, as we know. What is allowed in Europe or Latin America may be different from Malaysia / Southeast Asia. Is there anything you could say about that, or is that just simply obvious?
I think, you know, you're right in saying that making a connection to the Soviet Union or to countries where there's an authoritarian regime of some kind, that then as an artist, you have to rely on implication. You have to rely a lot more on suggestion, metaphor. You have to also, you know, play characters who are, you know, buffoon, I think, to kind of get your point across. And I think also, I think the difference is that you don't think the government is there to help you make art. You think the government is there to in some way thwart you. And the government's not there to encourage dissent. The government is there to make sure there is no dissenting voice. So your relationship to the government is a very different thing. In fact, I remember many years ago, I was doing a production with a Singaporean director, and in a workshop, she asked some questions to the Malaysians and the Singaporeans about the police. And the Malaysians immediately were like, oh yeah, well, you know, something goes wrong, you don't call the police. And the Singaporeans were very shocked by this. They said, but surely something goes wrong, you call the police. And we're like, oh no, don't call the police, because that's dangerous. You don't do that.
Yeah, but what's also interesting in a sense, when you're funded and sort of funding in theory is easy, in a sense that sort of strange spark might be reduced. Do you think that's true? I mean, it's always a bit of a dilemma, isn't it, that? In some sense.
Well, I think, you know, with us, we never were funded. I mean, we never approached the government for funding because we knew that wasn't the kind of, especially when we started in 1989, it really wasn't something we knew the government would be even remotely interested in funding. But the odd thing that happened was we started getting hired by the government for their, you know, weekend retreats or some government dinner. I mean, we got invited to the trade delegates conference. We got invited to finance ministers meetings. We got invited to APEC in the year that the then Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim was sacked, punched in the eye, and we were invited to APEC, and we had to make a decision because we were invited like months before that incident, and we had to decide that night, do we go ahead and do the show we want to do? And we did. We got into a lot of trouble for it, and they came down quite hard on us after, and we said, but this is what we do. And of course, there were all these delegates from all over the world, and the Chinese delegation kind of walked out kind of in protest. And, but, you know, other people came up to us later. They said, wow, that was really brave of you that you did that. And we said, well, this is kind of what we do. And we had to make a decision that just because now there has been such a huge turn of events in the country, we cannot come into a room like this and ignore it.
Yeah, no, my God, I mean, that just sounds so beautiful, and congratulations on your courage to do that. I mean, perhaps actually, in a funny way, it strikes me that given the sort of constraints that may be in your country, I know there's probably rulings about censorship and stuff like that, does that create a different form of creativity that perhaps is richer indeed than one that is mollycoddled in safety and funding?
You know, it's interesting. Like when we first started doing the political comedy, of course, a lot of people said, oh, those who were very much against us. And a lot of people were afraid, I think, for us. They said, but it's not Malaysian culture. And so I've always kind of tried to explain that actually, because people say, oh, satire is Western and irony is Western. And something I disagree with quite fundamentally, because if I look at Malaysian shadow theatre, wayang kulit, we call it. The whole idea in this is actually the puppet master has got all these many puppets, and some of them are kings and princes, and then you have the ordinary people who are also really important. The ordinary people are always one making jokes and always saying, what are they fighting about? What are they going on about? And those are the comic interludes where, and those are the bits which are the favorite part of any wayang kulit performance. You watch all the big epic parts and the princes fighting with each other. But the bit you enjoy the most is when the comic characters come on and they basically discuss local politics within this context. So I always used to say, well, this is kind of what we're doing. Just we're contemporary, we're modern wayang kulit, and with real bodies rather than shadow puppets. And so I think I might have lost the thread of your question now.
No, you don't need to, because you're going in a wonderful flow. I mean, basically, perhaps the word satire, just because it might have been, I don't know, invented in some language, that's where it got perhaps a bit confused. I mean, you had your own names for that thing that we might call satire and irony.
Yes, I think that, you know, it is part of human nature to mock the mighty, because otherwise they're going to get above themselves. And I think it is, you know, it is the role of theatre all over the world, I think, is the voice of the ordinary person. So I think that's very important. And you're right, once that ordinary person has to come into contact with power, it's a very complex relationship. I mean, you can see this with all art forms. The relationship of the artist to the patron is always very complex, because you're simultaneously, I mean, there's a satirist who wrote, unless you bite the hand from which you fed, it will pat you on the head. And this is something I've kind of lived by, that for me, we traditionally do not get much funding from the government, except for, after the last election, we finally got some, the 2018 election, we applied for government funding and we got it because things had changed. But before that, in 30 years, we had gotten very little because we bite, I think.
So basically your audience is paid for your survival in one sense.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, our audiences have been really loyal, and I think they appreciate what it is that we do. Our shows are always pretty much sold out. If we do a political comedy, tickets go just like that. And also, honestly, we have applied like abroad, but not for the comedy, not for the political satire. We apply abroad for other kinds of projects, sort of more issue-based plays or things like that.
So just obviously, as someone said, Anne Lee earlier said, we live in Covidian times. Have these Covidian times changed how you've gone about things?
Well, it's interesting. In Malaysia, we call it a Covidian times because there was a kind of a coup d'etat earlier this year.
Oh, right. So
we had a coup of a new government took over, which were not elected. We call it a backdoor government, and at the same time, COVID. So coup plus COVID becomes Covidian times, and of course, everybody's been saying to me, well, when are you going to do a show about this? And because the theatres are open, but you could only have a certain number of people in the theatres, so I have been sort of developing a show with my minister character and another character, and maybe it'll be in a theatre, but maybe we'll do it on a Zoom format. Yeah, which is what I did with the last play I did. I did a play via Zoom with all the actors in their own homes,
What sort of audience did you get? Do you know roughly?
Yeah, we got over 1,000 people for 2 performances because we wanted to make it live. We didn't want to do a recording. So the audience had to come at a certain time, come into a place that was called Cloud Theatre. We're in the lobby, be let in. So the feeling of liveness was very much there. And what was good was it reached 1,000 people in 20 countries. That was.
Oh my God! I mean, that's really imaginative. I mean, this is perhaps my sort of final question, is how would you summarize, in a sense, the barriers that you might have faced? I mean, clearly I can see how you've overcome them, but how would you summarize those barriers?
I think sometimes actually the biggest barrier I feel is just the lack of imagination on the part of the people who I think are in charge of culture. That I think they see artists as being something a bit burdensome, or else somebody who has to be helped. So, we need to help you. And they very rarely, I feel, or they don't often enough involve the artists and ask them how they are thinking, what they think is significant. So they don't see the artists. I really dislike it. Often we get called artistes in Malaysia rather than artists. Now we try to explain that artiste is something quite different. Whereas for me, the artist is an intellectual, is a thinker. The artist is there trying to create a different kind of, or to try to say, well, what is our society? It's trying to be a bridge between between power and the ordinary person. In fact, the artist is the medium, the shaman in a way for society. But I think in contemporary times, despite all the people saying, oh, we're going to help the artists, they've actually sidelined the artists and their role as being the intermediary, and they have taken over the role of intermediary, and the artist is the person to be given something to do that one thing. Whereas I think the engagement is really at a very low level. So for me, that's an obstacle. People may be well-meaning, but if you think of the artist as being just somebody who you need to give a gig to, then you just get a gig economy. You don't get a creative economy at all.
Yeah, no, I love 2 of your phrases. I mean, mock the mighty, obviously, is a great phrase, but actually recapturing the intermediary role, exactly that space has been taken over by someone else. And that to me is a real insight. I didn't actually think of that. Right. So thank you very much, Jo,
You're welcome.
for that. Look, that was really, I loved that. That was a delicious little interview, if I can call it that. It felt like a great meal. So look, I hope we can have the opportunity to have a much longer session sometime. And I'm so delighted you're part of the Creative Bureaucracy Festival.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Well, hello there, Anne Lee. I've got someone who's really interesting here. And Anne has been involved in films, reviewing them, writing about them, you know, books, everything, and even doing documentaries. But she's also looked at films in the broader context, you know, about how they affect social change or not. And I suppose really what you've also looked at is all the stereotyping that goes on and so on. Just tell me a bit about how, you know, people have responded to your work in Malaysia and beyond. That would be great to hear that.
Well, first, hi Charles. Glad to be part of this session. I think it's important to say that my PhD is really in Southeast Asian studies, and as a within the context of that, I have looked at Southeast Asian cinema and society. And before that, I'm more of a writer. I've made some films, but it's not really as a filmmaker that I'm here, but really as someone who has written about film, among other arts, in the last 25 years or so. Yeah.
So that's great. Well, just tell me then a bit about how you feel, whether you, when I say you personally, I mean just the work you're doing and you describe, what sort of, have things changed in that 25-year period?
Well, yes. So I think, I'm not sure if participants are that familiar with Southeast Asia, but, within, there are now the easiest way to say is, there are about 11 countries within Southeast Asia. There's the sort of mainland Southeast Asia, which is Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, and so forth. And then, island Southeast Asia, that's one way of looking at it, where you've got Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. This is actually more of a kind of, well, to many, it's a post-Second World War kind of term that, and has combined a region that's actually very, very different in many ways. So the tradition of filmmaking in the region is sort of dependent on who were the colonial masters, really. So you have Cambodian film, for example, which the French colonial masters. You have Malaysian, Singapore, British, and say Indonesian, of Dutch and so forth. So
that's interesting. So there's a real cultural spread there. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, of course, the whole rise of independence and those kinds of changes have then meant different impacts within the countries as they've sought to kind of create their own cultural voices and archive, and to explore and rediscover what was before the most immediate kind of colonial past. But in the last 25 years, I mean, if well, let's say a little bit more, if you're from the 1970s to present day, yeah, there have been big differences. And if you look, I'm probably most familiar with Philippines, Singapore, and Indonesia, but also Cambodia. I mean, Ritipan, for example, is foremost a filmmaker that most people would know. In Singapore, someone like Tan Pin Pin, but I think the most striking thing, Charles, is that we can talk about a kind of pre-COVID-19 and a post-COVID-19, because really the impact of the pandemic has been vast. And I mean, there are many common factors, but there are also very particular to what the market is in that particular country as well. There are those kinds of shifts. So pre and post, or even during, I mean, we're still here, aren't we? In the midst of it. So changes, but phenomenal, really, really some very, very difficult changes happening for filmmakers, who, many of whom, have had to take up other occupations than be in film. And this can range from actually going into government positions or Grab drivers, you know, all kinds, making food from their own homes and so forth. But you know, there's also some very constructive change that has happened as well. I mean, if you look at the fact is that everybody is at home, you know, and having to stay at home, and that means an unexpected but huge demand for content and watching. And I think the impact of Netflix or, you know, Disney is being felt for many, not just urban areas, but of course more principally those areas. But that has generated a lot of demand, which has helped filmmakers in unexpected ways.
And have there also been sort of films that were coming out of the region that have also been watched on these big channels as well?
Yes, but I think, you know, the traditional pre-COVIDian kind of idea would be theatrical release was everything. You know, if you made a film, you would want it to be in the cinemas. That's where it reaches the widest range of audience. And, you know, there's a sort of bonus if you could have the sort of OTT, you know, the over-the-top kind of the streaming companies. That was a bonus. But now it's completely the other way around. And, you know, people who, because so many, the immediate impact was that filmmakers have had to, you know, I think in Jakarta, for instance, you can only, a shooting has now been possible in the last 2 weeks or so. That's all. And so people are actually have been shooting elsewhere outside of Indonesia. People have been finding ways to
getting around the problem.
Yes,
what
yes.
Just pre-COVID, I like this COVIDian times. Pre-COVIDian times, what were typical barriers? I mean, could you portray everything you wanted, or was it all about love stories?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the two sort of big areas would be censorship and what you can cover, but also funding even before that. You know, the kind of opportunities for funding that you can get to make the kinds of films that you, I mean, if you're a commercial filmmaker, if you're an independent filmmaker, of course there are different choices that you make, you know, in terms of who your audiences are and the kinds of films and what the films say. But I think funding and censorship would be the main, you know, the traditional barriers.
But you know, some people use that cliched phrase, whatever they say, adversity is the mother of invention. How have people come around these sort of censorship problems?
Well, yes, I think a number of writers have spoken about how, you know, the censorship laws have made them more inventive. You know, they might have been more kind of didactic or more direct, but, you know, nothing like a censorship law to enhance your ability with metaphors and analogies. But of course, you know, there are, and I, you know, there's that other classic thing of the sort of Foucaultian idea that a censorship law generates satire, generates mocking of authority. You know, it marks where the boundaries are, so then you just push them, you know, and see where those boundaries can be pushed. Whereas if it's more sort of
we're also liberal that anything goes. Yes.
Well, I think there's a kind of, you know, there's a sort of so-called accidental censorship, and that kind of it's more nebulous that actually there are, I mean, in the case of Malaysia, for example, there are at least 10 laws that specify what you can or cannot say in relation to and arts. You know, it's film or it's performing arts. There's a Sedition Act. There's, you know, thank you very much, British Sedition Act 1948, which is still intact, even though, you know, we've had 50 over years of independence, but 60 over years even. So these laws, yes, we might say they encourage invention and innovativeness, but I think they are also, when they result in imprisonment and harassment, then I think they get more, of course.
Yes, I'm thinking here presumably being too critical of religion or things like LGBT rights and things like that. I presume these are the sort of obvious things that are problematic.
Yes, I mean, there's sometimes, yes, there are sometimes where it's actually sort of listed, you know, sort of race, politics, religion, but then the sort of societal norms which required that, for example, you know, in Thailand, anything about the monarchy is something typically you don't go anywhere near. But it's very interesting because, you know, with the demonstrations happening over the last few days, there's really a big shift happening there. But we'll see what happens in the following days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of censorship is more or less, there's self-censorship, there's the, you know, there are kinds of, there's the idea that it's a song and dance, that you know, that it's cat and mouse, that that you play with authorities in order to get your films made and to reach the audiences that you wish.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of your analogies there, the cat and mouse game, which is clearly one thing you're highlighting, and the other is that you flip into satire where things are slightly disguised, but those who know what the message is. Is that true?
Yeah. No, I think there's a number of filmmakers who take up with the sort of more, I don't know, satirical mode, you know, where again, that use of metaphors and analogies. Oh, and it can be, of course, quite direct or indirect. But one filmmaker, Malaysian filmmaker, Amir Muhammad, I think his is probably supremely satirical mode. In his body of work. Yeah.
So what are the sort of typical? So what are the sort of typical themes that one might say? I mean, I know this is a vast region, but just give me a couple of themes that one might say, oh, that's typical from our region.
Well, again, you know, depends what time frame we're talking about. From 1970s to now, there's a range. But let's say if I talk more recently, the familiar. Well, how do you say it? Like chestnuts of government, in which you mock authority by the use of particular politicians, where the sort of vein is around mocking norms also, in terms of, I mean, religion, I think, tends to be still an area that is trickiest to go, and especially because, I mean, currently, I think there's the demand for content being such as it is means that the traditional genres of rom-coms and action films and thrillers, those kinds of work are now about creating very essential rice to eat off of, because we have to remember that many filmmakers have been, you know, if the bans are that you cannot even shoot, you can't go out to shoot, never mind a censorship ban, you can't even make the film before you get to that point. You know, this is the vast difference between what we would normally talk about censorship. I mean, in the context of a ban, you know, a ban on shooting means you can't go and make the film.
So there's a
ban on this
ban.
film. This is the,
Has any of the filmmaking sort of that exists just through time, has it sort of had an effect on changing the way administrations or politicians think and move their societies forward, or are you always in sort of critical mode still?
Well, I think even if you choose to make a critical film in a mainstream format, let's say, I mean, I mentioned Ritipan, for example, you know, certain films, they are written in a way which is a feature film. It's not a documentary. It's not a kind of abstract independent film that, you know, you're going to see in only a very small audience. this range of work over a period of time will show it. You know, the change both is reflected in cinema and is driven, I think, by the importance of narratives. You know, if you're creating narratives that are critical of existing mainstream narratives, then that is going to create discussion and conversation that can result in bans, depending on how you know, widespread those are. And I think the big shift, also apart from the sort of COVIDian, is online. Governments are, depending on which country, of course, but certainly, you know, we're not talking about, on the whole, I think most developing countries, I mean, most countries in Southeast Asia have access to mobile phones much more than they would kind of, you know, computers and so forth. The numbers are generally, of course it depends, it really depends, but access to be able to watch films globally now or regionally is now much greater than it ever was before. As a result of the fact that, you know, people are at home now. I mean, you know, if you were to go out to the cinema and watch something, then you would just go to your local, or you go to, you know, and I think I was talking to a couple of filmmakers earlier this week. There are a number of film festivals that are actually doing much better now, you know, Southeast Asian based film festivals, in terms of ticket sales, because now the audience is global. You know, it's not something that is more localized, although that's a priority of
just a question that I'm just thinking, because there's also documentaries. What about documentaries? Are there hard-hitting documentaries? Again, we're talking about a vast region, but has that grown, or has that changed, or the topics changed there?
No, I think you always, I think the space has expanded. If you know, there's Freedom Festival, there are a number of festivals that exist where, you know, they were started perhaps in the late 1980s or 1990s, and which have become stronger in terms of both their range of films, the number of films, the audiences participating. I think that's very true. But at the same time, you know, you're having a situation where filmmakers themselves, as I mentioned, are having to change jobs or just, you know, survive.
It's a global phenomenon, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, just a sort of final question. If you compare, let's say, Europe and Southeast Asia, I know there's vast differences, but would you say that the themes you see in Europe versus Asia, Southeast Asia, are incredibly different, or what would you say to that?
Well, I'm not so familiar with what, you know, what's happening in Europe, but I'm quite sure I'm quite sure there would be similarities of difficulty in terms of, well, or opportunity by the same time. I mean, this space, as one filmmaker, Paul Augusta, has described it, you know, this moment of between hell and opportunity, which is existing now. I'm sure there will be similar challenges, and of course, thematically, I mean, love will be one of them. You know, politics, of course, will be huge. You know, these things would remain to be key themes within a world cinema. Yeah.
I mean, I just like that sort of encapsulation of yours. Love, I suppose a few thrillers, but also that thing about hell and opportunity is a wonderful line with which we can finish our talk. Look, I hope we can extend this conversation in many ways, and I'm so pleased you've been with us today, Anne Lee, and we'll continue our conversations, if we may.
Yes, I look forward to that, because it's a huge region, many years, many genres, many filmmakers, and it's nice to be able to at least glance upon a few and some of it in this time.
Thank you very much, Anne, and I hope to see you soon.